recycling in your daily research. So you see from these different trash bins that I've become an expert in trash recently in the last years, and even distinguish between different categories. And in order to explain a little bit what I mean with this, I would like to jump into our daily business, right? So how do we do research nowadays? And then we can discuss how research in the future will look like. So, first question, what do we find in the publication? So typically, there's a table. There could be a figure. There could be a crystal structure. We're talking about materials. Typically, there are also a few more numbers that we extract from all the investigations that we have done, but we never ever provide all the information. That means if you think about that, until we wrote this paper, my PhD students spent 2 or 3 years, person years, plus the effort of other people. So there's several person years going into a PhD. There are millions of CPU hours going in a PhD or in a paper. There's petabytes, or no, maybe not petabytes, but gigabytes and terabytes of data. But at the end, we publish this. And all the other information that we have gained throughout these few years is all lost because they end up in the trash, right? This is completely forgotten when the PhD student leaves. The information is not there anymore, and the next student starts to do the same again and again and again. So what I call the residual trash here is everything that you find in a publication, but carries, you don't find in the publication, but carries a lot of knowledge. The next category concerns what I call candidate materials. I mean, high throughput investigations are very fashionable right away. So people compute the materials properties for hundreds, for thousands, for 10,000 of materials for a certain purpose. For instance, trying to find a good solar cell material. But whatever does not fit this purpose is basically forgotten, right? You don't consider this anymore. And the same is true for high throughput synthesis or high throughput experimental investigations. So this is bad probably for the purpose it has been created for, but could be very good for another purpose. So keep it. Another category, and this is probably the most problematic thing in fair data, is metadata. I think if we don't describe the data properly, they don't mean anything. And many data are kept somewhere in big storage without a proper description, so you can throw them away right away, right? Because they don't mean anything if they are not really annotated with all the information. For instance, from our field, sometimes one data set has to be annotated by 1,000 metadata, because this is important to understand what we have measured or what we have computed. And very often this information is just somewhere else in notebooks, even handwritten notebooks. So we have to bring all this together in order to make data meaningful. And last but not least, if you're a crystal grower and you grow a crystal that doesn't look nice, you would never publish the recipe of this crystal because it's not meaningful, right? So nature wouldn't accept this in a publication. However, this is also important because our research is so much biased towards success stories. And we have to learn also from failures. And publishing data in addition to publications gives us the chance to also keep this knowledge and increase actually the knowledge overall. So at the end of the day, if we collect all this, if you make sure that we keep all this data and make them meaningful, we know data is a very important raw material for the 21st century, so we can turn them into gold, and this is what we're doing right now. So how do we do it? And now this brings me to the research of tomorrow. What I envision is that bringing together the information that we have on the whole planet, so not just from one research group, but from everyone on this planet, we will be able at some point to distinguish data, or to distinguish materials in terms of the composition and configuration according to their purpose. So we will group these materials such that we find materials that are good for superconductivity or good for photovoltaics. Of course, this will not be a two-dimensional map like the map of Europe, where you find out where people speak French or Spanish. So this will be a highly dimensional map, of course, but it should be possible actually to do this once we have enough data and we have the proper tools. And this actually brings me to the most important thing here. So first of all, we want to find something exceptional, and exceptional means we should think out of the box. So if we just look at superconductors to find the new superconductors, there will be progress, but it will be minor progress. If we want to really make a big step, we have to consider all the information and all the materials properties. So we want to find something exceptional, the pearl. Yeah? And for this, we need two things. One is that we need two tools, and this is where artificial intelligence comes in. But these tools need to be different to what we have nowadays, because they just, typically machine learning does interpolation, right? Doesn't take you out of the box. So we need to have tools that go beyond this, and they have predictive power, such that to predict also in the material space where we have not looked at probably, right? That's one thing. The other thing is actually we need the right data, and with right, I mean they should contain the relevant information, but they have to be also very high quality. This is very important. So, how we do this? You see this logo. This is the Nomad database, or the Nomad platform, actually. But before I describe what we're doing here, let's go back a little bit in history. So, it was actually 2011 when Barack Obama announced the Materials Genome Initiative. So, you know, every American president has a special program, and Obama wanted to help business. So he didn't think so much about science, but he wanted to help business, because we know from the invention of material until the market, until it's really produced in large quantities, this takes ages. It takes 2 centuries, very often 3 centuries, depending on the application, of course. And he wanted to speed up this process. How can we make this process faster to the market, right? Interestingly, it was only 4 years later when there was a press release by the White House telling that data underlying scientific publications are not available for confirmatory analysis, reuse, and repurpose is anachronistic. So it's only 4 years later that the White House advocated for open data. Open science came even later, right? And 1 year later, then finally this very famous paper on the fair guiding principle appeared. This was in 2016. Now I have to say I'm a little bit proud that we announced the Nomad data platform in 2014, and I would like to convince you in a snapshot this was already fair at this point, fully fair, right? So the history is that we started with a database that was programmed by a postdoc of mine, so in order to keep the data of 2 groups and exchange the data there, and also do some machine learning at that point already in 2011, this was started. But then we found out that this is so convenient to get organized, and we invited the whole community to upload their computational materials data to this central database. Right? So, and this is the FinFair data that are uploaded there, of course, are findable, and they're also accessible because you can download them. But we wanted to have them human accessible in the sense that, let's say, an experimentalist or an engineer doesn't make sense of a data file. So we wanted to show actually the community what the results of these calculations were, and this is what we did with the Nomad Encyclopedia. Interoperability, I said this is the biggest burden here, is because you see all these calculations have been produced by different methods and codes and people, so we had to bring everything on the same file formats, the same units, such that people can operate on the whole data space. And finally, the reusability was shown or demonstrated with the artificial intelligence toolkit that contains already a selection of machine learning tools and AI tools that goes in the direction of somehow creating patterns in data that we don't know right now. Now, as I shown before, we got a little bit transformed in this database initiative here, and this is where we are now. So the database, or the whole infrastructure, it's not just a pure database. This is used now by, we have registered users from more than 1,000 academic institutions worldwide. So there are several thousand registered users, but there are many more users because for using the data, you don't need to register. It's just if you contribute, if you upload data, then you need to have an account. Yeah, this is nice. How do we do this now? Actually, I have to tell now. Unfortunately, this pointer doesn't work. So what you have seen before, the original database started with the computational side, and then you could upload directly to the central repository. What we have now in the middle, you see, this is an oasis. We call them oasis. This is exactly the same software like the central software, but you can install it in your lab. You can share the data in the group or between groups with your friends, and you can also exchange data with the central installation. And you see also from the instrument there, we have extended the whole thing in terms of experimental science, and such that the user can look up all the data that are created in the respective field. Who are we? Actually, this is what already was announced. We are a consortium of the NFDI, the German Research Data Infrastructure. It's FERMAT, the Consortium for Solid-State Physics and the Chemical Physics of Solids. And you see from this colorful pattern that we have a portfolio that goes far beyond what we had done before with the computational science. I very quickly go through this to explain how we do, because I mentioned before that metadata is the most crucial thing there. We have to annotate the data properly, we have to describe this data properly, and that's why we do this in a very tedious way for all these different areas. In theory, you see theory is not just density functional theory that we have shown before. We've extended this to classical simulation, to excitations. We've extended to experiment. We started with these 5 different experiments like optical spectroscopy and electron microscopy and you name it, but we're extending this portfolio with respect to many different experimental techniques, and at the same time we do the same for also different synthesis routes, so creation of material samples. So this is a very, as I say, tedious, a very strategic way to do this. But of course, we also have to think that our community is extremely broad. So materials, you have seen the different applications before. They concern optoelectronics, they concern magnetism, they concern alloys and tools and whatever. So we have to serve a community that it's enormously wide, and in order to do so, probably it's too long to wait for the community, such that every experiment and every apparatus and every method is actually captured in the very tedious way. So we want to give people the tools that they can use right away, also in the hope that they give us feedback what they need and what else we can incorporate. And this is why we have these use case demonstrators. So this is this area E, and I would like to take one example out of this in order to demonstrate how we work. So this is about solar cells, and what this graphic shows you, again, how long it takes, so to say, in order to make a material really useful for production. You see, this takes ages in order to speed up the efficiency of solar cells. So there's one material class, these are the halide perovskites that have a steeper slope, actually, and they're in China, actually, already in production. So let me explain you, again, with our daily research, how we work and why our research is so slow. So typically it starts from reading literature, right? Then the researchers decide what is the next material, for instance, to think about. Then they synthesize, again, a slow process, and they characterize very carefully, then they grow a device, then they publish a paper, and the story goes on, right? So how to speed this up? I would like to show you also a graph, again, that shows the solar cell efficiency, but not in terms of years, but here it's in terms of publications that we have. So if we have reached 100,000, there's no way that any researcher on this planet can keep this, keep all this information in their heads. Sorry. So we have to get organized here, right? So there was a very interesting pioneering project where 100 people got together, were reading 16,000 publications about 42,000 solar cells. They put everything into one paper, and this was published in Nature Energy in 2022. So this was really a heroic act, but it's difficult to update. So which of the new students will do the same work for everything that comes afterwards? So at the same time, we also suffer from heterogeneous sources. So we have these publications that, for instance, efficiency tables, we have databases, we have lab notebooks, and at the end you have to bring all this together. And so what we did actually, we incorporated all this into the Nomad data platform. There you can explore all these materials under the use cases. For instance, exploring what the efficiency of a material is as a function of the open circuit voltage. Now, go to the next process. Again, synthesis is slow, but what I'm talking about, actually, there is combinatorial synthesis available, there is high throughput characterization available, there are autonomous labs available, there is AI support for this. So why I'm complaining about this? Because think about, if you do this in this high throughput manner, how do you manage the data in such a lab? And this is where Nomad Oasis comes in, this standalone version that people can install in the labs and use according to their wills, and also accommodate it according to their wills. So finally, let's go to the device. Actually, I like to emphasize here that the device is a very complicated thing. It not only concerns this solar absorber material, but there are other layers. And for instance, those layers that transport away the charges, which is very important, right? So what you see here is a graph that actually shows a network of these solar cell materials. And you believe it or not, people have used 2,600 combinations of such transport layers. So again, there is no person on earth who can keep all this in mind and make sense out of this. And this again tells you that we need automatic tools and electronic tools to work with this. So a snapshot thought about Oasis. You see here we have already built a solar network. There's many Oasis installations on this planet already. These are only a few of them that are dedicated to solar cells. So this network from Helmholtz Center to Erlangen to KIT, where people have installed this, they exchange data, they accommodate their own tools inside, and they can also exchange the data with the central installation, everything based on the same protocols and definitions. So if you're actually interested to read more numbers, you're welcome to see what are the data that we produce, how many installations we have, and so on. But anyway, probably you're more interested to read about the concept behind Nomad and Fermat. This is published in 2022 in Nature. But it's not only that we published the concept, we also published the software. So the whole Nomad stack, so to say, is available. And the publication in JAWS appeared last year. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for guiding us in this fascinating area of science. I think we have time for a couple of questions. There is a question on Slido, and then the second one, I'm going to take a question from the audience. Oh, and I see someone is very eager to ask a question, so let's start here then.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. And you started with recycling and the waste. How many failure data you have now in Nomad?
How many failures?
Yeah.
Well, let me explain it with theory, because I'm a theorist, right? So 2 years ago, I would have argued my group or told my co-workers, upload the best possible calculation, everything converged, all parameters checked, such that this is the result of a calculation. What I tell them now, publish everything. So every student actually has to do this, and the next student has to do it again. So you control the parameters. So increase a parameter and see, well, is the basis set good enough? Then is the integration technique good enough? And so on. So you scan all the parameters until everything is perfect. Now I tell them, put everything together so we can create what we call data sets in Nomad, such that you combine them to such a data set. You give them a name and say, this is the convergence of magnesium oxide optical spectra, something like that. And with this, we can learn from these failures, right? And I didn't have time enough, but actually in my group, we use also artificial intelligence to learn these error estimates, such that, for instance, in the future, we can either augment the data by extrapolation to the right limit, or at least to extract, knowing the failures, knowing the errors, we can extract data that are good enough to be used together. And I think interoperability is the biggest problem. And in this sense, it will help us to make data more interoperable, to tell people what we can use safely together. Is there a problem of an apparatus or whatever, or is the calculation not well converged for a certain purpose? I think this is also a tedious process, but I think together with dedicated benchmark data sets and machine learning to learn these error bars, we should manage to make data more interoperable.
I see we have another question there. Maybe we take that and as last question.
Yes, you spoke about interoperability, and that's really a challenge, but you somehow were able to solve that with a NOMAD. But how does it look with other data sets outside NOMAD? So how do you represent all the parameters, variables, which representation do you use there? Do you rely on semantic artifacts? Is it not only human, but also really machine interpretable?
Yeah, actually, this is what I meant before, right? We try to machine learn the error bars. We also would like to annotate data. Actually, I have to say up front that data are never wrong in this sense, right? Maybe you screw up your apparatus, right? But this is, there's also some automatic check when you upload data. But data are created for a certain purpose. So for some investigations, it's good enough to have a certain resolution, and for other investigation, you need better. So the data set, the other is not wrong in that sense, right? But we want to annotate data at some point to tell for which purpose you can use it, right? So, and this concerns the calculation, the convergence of calculations. This concerns also the resolution of apparatus and temperatures and whatever. And this, of course, this knowledge can then also be used by others because, well, we are advocating open science, no? We put everything public.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not talking about machine learning. I'm talking about machine interpretability. So.
Yeah.
Really looking at the semantic description of these. And yeah, there are frameworks like iAdopt. You might be interested to look into
I think maybe you can follow up this
Yeah,
later
yeah.
on because we
So
really
also,
have a packed program.
it's all
Sorry, but Claudia is
machine
going to be with us
interpretability.
for at least the next couple of hours,
Yes.
I hope. So let's thank again Claudia with a big applause. Thank you very much.